These words challenge everything we've been taught about faith, because if the kingdom of heaven is within us, then salvation doesn't depend on religion, it depends on consciousness. And that, for institutions, has always been far too dangerous to reveal. Think about that for a moment. For centuries, the fear of hell and the promise of paradise were the pillars that kept people on their knees. It was easier to control faith when the divine was distant, when only a few could interpret it. But Jesus, in these forbidden texts, teaches the opposite. The sacred is accessible, personal, and present. He doesn't ask for temples of stone, but temples of the soul. The apocryphal writings show us a teacher who walked among people as a friend, not as an untouchable figure. A man who laughed, got angry, loved. A man who, even in the face of death, spoke of life. In his teachings, faith wasn't submission, it was liberation. Imagine if that message had been accepted from the beginning. Perhaps the world wouldn't have been divided among religions. Perhaps there would have been no crusades, pyres, or holy wars. Maybe we would understand that the divine isn't the monopoly of any institution, but a spark that lives within all of us. And that's what makes these discoveries so powerful. It's not about attacking faith, but about remembering its forgotten origin. The faith that's born from inner silence, not imposed fear. The faith that awakens when we realize that the kingdom of heaven isn't a dwelling after death, but the moment we recognize our true essence. That's why these texts were silenced, because a people who know themselves, who understand the power that lives within them, do not bow easily. They don't bend to those who claim to own the truth. And perhaps that's the greatest lost teaching of Jesus, that the true miracle is awakening, realizing that we don't need to be saved, only reminded of who we are. These forgotten pages don't speak of a distant God, but of a God who dwells in breath, thought, and gesture. A God who doesn't demand worship, but awareness. A God who has always been here, waiting to be recognized within each of us. And it's at this point that the true revelation begins, the one that was hidden almost 2,000 years ago. In the Gospel of Thomas, one phrase repeats like an echo of eternity. The kingdom is inside you and outside you. When you come to know yourselves, you will be known, and you will realize that you are children of the living God. This phrase, simple and luminous, is a spiritual earthquake, because it shifts the axis of faith. The kingdom of heaven ceases to be a destination and becomes a state of consciousness. Entering the kingdom is remembering who we are, not merely believing in something beyond. In these texts, Jesus does not appear as the founder of a religion, but as a master of consciousness. He teaches about the unity of opposites, the harmony between body and spirit, the balance between reason and intuition, principles we now call self-knowledge. In his words, when you make the two one, then you will enter the kingdom. A profound metaphor about integrating our opposing sides, the masculine and the feminine, the rational and the intuitive, the human and the divine. These ideas resonate with teachings much older, such as those of Hermes Trismegistus, 3 millennia before Christ, who said, "What is above is like what is below." The same vision appears in Jesus, harmony between heaven and earth, between the visible and the invisible, It is no coincidence. It is a golden thread of wisdom running through the centuries, always persecuted, always hidden. But why did the church want to erase this? Because a man who understands that God dwells within himself does not kneel before other men. He needs no mediators, temples, or dogmas. And when religious power realized this, it understood it was facing something more dangerous than any heresy: spiritual freedom. During the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, bishops and theologians decided what would be considered divine truth. Everything that spoke of a human, conscious, intimate, and questioning Jesus was rejected. Emperor Constantine needed a unified faith, a religion that could control empires, not consciousness. And so the living and awakened Christ was turned into a distant icon, suspended between suffering and promise. The apocryphal Gospels were declared dangerous and their bearers heretics. But fire does not destroy what is made of light. Centuries later, these texts would resurface, fragile, torn, yet intact in essence. And within them, a message endures. The kingdom of heaven is the state of being that awakens. It is not a place, but a remembrance. Not the afterlife, but the now. Today, more and more people feel this inner calling. They do not seek answers in temples, but within themselves. And perhaps that explains why these manuscripts have resurfaced in this era, because humanity is once again ready to listen. When Jesus said, "You are gods," he was not speaking of arrogance, but of potential, of a dormant power forgotten out of fear, but still present. And as we recognize it, we cease to be servants and become co-creators. The kingdom then stops being a promise and becomes an experience. These texts do not ask us to abandon faith. They ask that faith return inward, where the divine has always been waiting for us. The forbidden message is simple and devastating. You don't need to follow anyone to find God. You need to find yourself. From the beginning, man has lifted his eyes to the sky in search of answers. He wanted to understand the invisible, to touch the divine. But the sky, the one that opens above us, has always been a mirror. The kingdom of heaven, as Jesus said, was never distant, but hidden beneath the veil of our own unconsciousness. In the apocryphal texts, he speaks directly. The kingdom is inside you and outside you. When you know yourself, you will know that you are a child of the living God. There is no clearer metaphor. Jesus invites us to self-discovery, not submission. He did not come to found churches, but to remind humanity of the power that dwells within. And this power is simple, silent, yet transformative. It is the divine spark that vibrates in every lucid thought, every act of love, every moment of presence. But why did we forget? Because fear has always been an easier tool than love. It was simpler to say that paradise was distant, that only a few would reach it. But in the lost manuscripts, Christ says, the kingdom is not conquered, it is awakened. When we make the two one, body and spirit, man and woman, heaven and earth, we reach that state. The ancients called it the great work, the process of inner unification. Centuries later, the alchemists would translate this teaching into symbols, lead transformed into gold. But the true gold is not metal. It is consciousness. It is when the mind understands the heart, and the heart understands silence. In these texts, Jesus is not only the Messiah, he is the model of the awakened being. He lived what he taught, the communion between the human and the divine. And this is what he meant when he said, "You are God's, and you can do all that I do, and even more." These words, if truly understood, would turn the world upside down. Imagine their impact on a society built upon spiritual hierarchies, upon the idea that some are chosen and others are not. But Jesus spoke of a God who does not choose, a God who dwells in everyone, who pulses in the air, in life, in small things, a God who demands no golden temples, only open eyes and present hearts. He did not promise the kingdom as a reward, but as a remembrance. Every time someone recognizes themselves, every time a man or woman understands their own worth, the kingdom manifests, not high in the clouds, but in simple gestures, in silent forgiveness, in a compassionate gaze, in the instant we stop reacting out of fear and begin to act out of love. That is the true miracle, the change of consciousness. In the texts of Thomas and Mary Magdalene, Christ teaches that those who seek outside are lost, but those who look within are found. These words are the essence of self-knowledge. It is no coincidence that so many masters from different times and cultures said the same thing. Buddha called it enlightenment. Hermes called it the union of what is above with what is below. Jesus called it the kingdom of heaven. The name changes, but the truth remains the same. We are part of the divinity we seek. But man is afraid to look within, because there, alongside the light, lives the shadow. The traumas, guilt, desires, and pains we prefer to hide. And that is why the path to the kingdom is so difficult. It demands courage. Not the courage to fight the world, but to face oneself. Just as iron needs fire to become a blade, the human being needs consciousness to become free. In the manuscripts found at Nag Hammadi, there is a passage where Jesus says, "If you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, then you will enter the kingdom." This is the oldest description of integration, the idea of uniting reason and emotion, action and contemplation, spirit and matter. When man stops living in fragments and begins to live as a whole, he awakens. Institutional religion could never allow that, because a whole man cannot be manipulated. He does not fear hell because he understands that hell is the state of ignorance and heaven the state of consciousness. He does not obey out of fear but acts out of wisdom. And such freedom, 2,000 years ago, was a threat to power. The message had to be shaped, the master turned into an idol, the teaching into a rule, the search replaced by belief. And so, slowly, the kingdom of heaven was pushed to the afterlife. But the Christ of the Apocrypha did not speak of the afterlife. He spoke of the now, of the moment when man awakens to life and understands that the divine is not a reward, but a remembrance. The kingdom, he said, is not a place, it is a state. It is not the sky above our heads, it is the sky within our eyes, when we finally learn to see. If man discovers he carries the divine, he needs no intermediaries, no temples, dogmas, or spiritual authorities. He needs only the courage to look at himself and the humility to recognize himself. That is what the apostles sought to preserve when they hid the scrolls in caves. They were not merely storing texts. They were protecting the spiritual freedom of humanity. And now, centuries later, that message resurfaces, not to destroy beliefs, but to free them, not to deny God, but to reveal where He has always been, within you, within me, within all of us. The kingdom of heaven, after all, is the moment we awaken. It is the moment we remember that faith is not a prison, it is wings. That prayer is not supplication, it is communion. And that love is the secret language between man and the divine. So perhaps the true teaching of Jesus was never about religion, but about remembrance. Remembering that we are part of the whole, and that the whole dwells within us. Remembering that paradise is not a destination, it is a state, and that Christ is not on the altar, nor on the cross, but in the human being who awakens to themselves. Silence. Listen. The kingdom of heaven speaks within you.